I gave this talk, this presentation, the title of Slow Adventism, because it takes this title, picks up the title of my latest book that I have here in my hand, even though I will not speak about this book, but I will like only to quote a short sentence as a kind of introduction. I don't pretend that the slow Adventist is the solution. I think that there is never only one solution. And when we forget that, with the pretended solutions, sometimes we create more problems. Even at the beginning, they help us. I think that every timely proposal is born unilateral and incomplete. And when this proposal, good proposals, understand themselves as incomplete and unilateral, there is the potentiality in them to do some good. If they don't are aware of this unilateralism, sometimes they end up very badly, creating more problems than really solving qualitatively what the situation our church is. So I read only one sentence. A fast Adventism, as much as a hypertrophic body, is not necessarily more performant. Faster and bigger are not necessarily synonyms of health or flourishing. In order for somebody or something to flourish, it might be necessary to recover incompleteness, vulnerability, and slowness as necessary and primordial conditions for becoming human. Full and plethoric entities are inappropriate and unprepared to flourish because they are not touched by a beneficial emptiness that is essential for surviving and entering into relation. As much as persuasive and touching melodies presuppose and include silences and pauses, so healthy beings are not plethoric, but intermittent and interrupted entities. They are reasonable beings who have learned to perceive life's systole and diastole as mechanisms that support life in its contractions and expansions, in its affirmation and flexibility, in its giving and receiving, in the context of the multiple relationships that life offers and demands from us. So this is what I understand as the necessity of considering the possibility of a slow Adventism, not as a deformation of Adventism, but eventually as a part of a new solution. Why start from this perspective, that is an atypical perspective? Because it's not easy to understand the nature of what we are and what we believe in this case, not only as believers, but as humans in general. And this is the reason, for instance, we Protestants were born starting from a hard critic to what we consider to be a deformed religiosity as expressed in Catholicism. Luther, Calvin, but also we Adventists, the 19th century. We consider that this Catholic religiosity was deformed because it was a traditional faith, an ecclesiocentric, excessively church-centered faith, not based in the Bible, at least not enough, a superstitious, repetitive, ritualistic, pyramidal faith. We have discovered, the critic of this Catholic faith, instead a dynamic faith, based in the Bible, in our awareness, in our reason and will, a personal faith, concrete, pragmatic, and disciplined faith. The problem is that after 500 years of Protestantism and 180 years for us Adventists, we perceive, if we are careful, we perceive that we also have a problem, probably many problems. But let us say we perceive that our situation, even as Protestant and Adventists, has become problematic. We don't grow qualitatively, and maybe for this reason, we try to grow quantitatively. We have a low degree of satisfaction in our communities. In our communities also emerge fanaticism, probably as a way of compensating. People eventually admire us, but very often they don't love us because we are not trusting, flourishing, biophilic people, but rather obsessive, compulsive, maniacal, and eventually necrophilic. I'm taking a description made by Eric Fromm, who would say we love more, and that applies also for us Adventists, probably we love more things, doctrines, principles, and norms than people. This is the definition Eric Fromm gives from necrophilic. What all these elements have in common is that they have not life by their own in themselves. Even doctrines and principles are interesting things, but have not a life by themselves and don't transmit life. Sacred things, as doctrines, principles, and even the Bible itself, are more things than sacred. Sacred is the life given, promoted, and fostered by the Holy Spirit. And note what this life becomes in our rituals and traditions. May these rituals and traditions be Catholic or Protestant, Protestant or Adventist, medieval or postmodern. The description is the same. So actually, I try to confront my students, and also I try to confront Adventists in this book I spoke to you about, Slow Adventism, with a difficult diagnosis. I don't say that I have succeeded in that. I'm just pretending to make the effort of making what I call a differential diagnosis. And that is the first problem for today Adventism. Because because you have a body, you have a doctor, that is very important in the medical level, not to have a doctor, a physician, but to have a physician expert in making a differential diagnosis. Because in medicine, for instance, not all the diseases belong to the same typology. And we could, speak of two big groups of diagnoses. One that we could call diagnosis for a defect, for hypofunctioning of the body. And we are aware of this, for instance, when a heart has a low cardiac rhythm, there's a defect in the functioning of the body. And then we give that heart some stimulating medicines. But we will completely make a mistake If we conceive that every disease, cardiac disease, has this typology of structure by deficit, because there are a second group of diseases that are actually the opposite. They are structured not by a deficit, but by an excess of something. We have this, for instance, with the heart. The heart can be sick because it has an hypofunctionality, but it can also be sick because it has an hyperfunctionality. If our heart is deformed because has this hyperfunctionality, I would completely, be wrong if I give that patient adrenaline, for instance, that is an stimulating of the cardiac rhythm, because I'm in face of a second completely diverse typology of dysfunctioning that is by excess and not by deficit. And this is what I try to apply also for our being Adventist. Generally speaking, we believe, and our leaders believe, that Adventism doesn't function well because we have a deficit of Adventism. So whatever be the problem, institutional, spiritual, personal, we give an stimulating spiritual medicine for making that experience be healthier. But we not consider at all that it could be eventually the other way around, that we are spiritually ill and deformed, not by a defect of religiosity, but by an excess of religiosity, an excess of Adventism. So if in this case we apply, as a doctor wrongly does with a hyper functioning heart, we complicate even more the problem, because we are facing another type of dysfunctionality. So this is my guess, that Adventism is not much deformed because it's lacking in being more Adventist. I'm pretending in this book that actually we are not feeling well because we are too much Adventist. But how can you explain to people to be less Adventist? How can you explain a people who want to be spiritual to be less spiritual? That is difficult. But a correct understanding of the deformation of spirituality should push us to be expert in differential diagnosis. In a general diagnosis of Adventism, for my part, not only religious but cultural, in that I try to explain in my book, is because we are too much persisting and repeating and giving people the same remedies that have caused the problem. The only difference is that we just update them. But updating the mechanism that have caused our malaise, spiritual, cultural malaise, just makes the problem even worse. One short example of this. Even if you don't believe, because you North Hemisphere people think that we South Hemisphere, South Americans, take life very easily spontaneously. But actually, my father was also a pastor, and he has made from our family, me and my brothers, a very Nordic people, even if we are Southerns. So we actually, in our feelings, in our reactions, are very much like Germans. The discipline, hard work, awareness, commitment, all this is the solution for your life and your ministry. My father used to tell me, without perceiving, I'm criticizing my father, who is dead now, but just a kind of try to explain. Because my father thought that all the problems in an Adventist family, in a professional life, were to attribute to a lack of discipline, to a lack of conviction, to a lack of commitment. So this was his way of thinking, his worldview. And this worldview, my father very generously shared with his family, his children. Even if I criticize him for many things, I have been not able to change it. I have just updated it. Because even if I was critical of my father, I have applied to my children the same perspective. If life doesn't function, it's because you are not committed enough, you have not enough discipline, you are not aware of your duties. The only difference that while my father shared with us all these values from a biblical perspective, I have shared that with my children from a philosophical and cultural perspective. This is the only difference. But the main perspective has remained the same. Up until now, even if my children are grown up, I tell them without even noticing, every time they come back to me, you need to be focused. You need to move. You need to apply yourself. You need to be committed. The same thing. The question is, what if the life of my children is deformed by an excess of that? Because they are maybe too much disciplined. They are not in the church, they don't attend the church. But even if they don't attend the church, the paradox is that they apply to life the same religious perspective I apply to my religious life. So actually, they have this mindsetting, Adventist mindsetting, even if they don't attend the church. So it's the reason we are repeating in the various generations of my family, my father, me, my children, and if they are not wise enough, probably they will repeat the same cultural perspective on their children, only updating them to a new context because things change and so on. This is the reason I consider a differential diagnosis is necessary, mandatory for us Adventists. Because we are very often persistent and give some solutions, some strategies, without being aware that those same strategies have caused the problem. So how could we solve the problems that have been caused by the same values and principles that have been playing a main role in our spiritual journey? And what I would like to do now, in the minutes all left, is to give a practical example, and then we will discuss a little bit starting from one of the mechanisms that certainly is the best resource we have. But by the same principle I have been trying to explain, doesn't change us anymore. And this is the Bible reading. If we read so often with such a dedication the Bible, why the Bible is not transforming us? What the Bible is preserving in us, what my book called our compulsions and our sublimations. What is happening? And you may know theoretically, but practically it's more difficult, that the Bible is not Adventist. But we have transformed the Universal Bible in an Adventist Bible. We criticize the Jehovah's Witness to have written a particular version of the Bible for them. We are the same. The only consolation we have is that we don't have written a particular version, but in our mind, we have even maybe more than the Jehovah's Witnesses, a typical Adventist Bible. And how can this Bible, Adventist Bible, help us? The Bible can be a source of renewal, of correction, only if it doesn't become Adventist. You know, and you can perceive this, what I call chronic pervasive mechanisms of making the Bible Adventist in the Sabbath school lesson. We repeat the study of the Bible in the Sabbath school lesson every 4 years, it seems to me. But every time we repeat the reading of the Bible in the Sabbath school lesson, we continue to say the same things since 160 years when the Sabbath school started. We don't manage to discover something new. Why? Because we have identified too much the Universal Bible with the Adventist Bible. Actually, I would say even that it's not a problem to have an Adventist Bible, because every community has its own. What becomes problematic is after that, if we forget that the Bible is not Adventist and that the legitimate Adventist reading version of the Bible is provisorily and transitory, cannot be perennial. Okay? And I want to read with you to make a practical exercise. Maybe you are wiser than I think you are, and I will not convince that you are wrong, but I will try my best to convince that you are wrong. Even if you are nice and clever Adventists, you are wrong in some reading of the Bible. And we will go to a very known passage in the Bible that is Psalm 23. This psalm has been a psalm of consolation throughout history. Augustine read this psalm this way. Luther, Calvin, Wesley, Ellen G. White, our pioneers, and we ourselves have read always this psalm as a source of consolation. Certainly it is. And I will read it even if we know it by heart, just to feel flowing the words of this beautiful prayer. It said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of the death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. How many good shepherd psalms are in the Bible? Do you have a guess? Or to restrain in the book of Psalms, how many good shepherd psalms are in the book of Psalms? This one, certainly this is a, but actually this is the complexity we're missing. Because, for instance, from the 150 psalms, we know for sure, if you read the specialists, Brueggemann, Mobbinkel, Gunkel, and so on, that only 72, 73, so less than a half, are psalms written by David, even though we keep saying that the book of Psalm is written by David. Actually, to introduce some uncertainty concerning this Good Shepherd Psalm, I can tell you that actually there is another Good Shepherd Psalm in the Psalm 80. The Psalm 80 also starts with a Good Shepherd expression, and is actually a psalm of the Good Shepherd. The Hebrew word is the word rohe, shepherd. But there is a difference. Which difference? That the Psalm 23, Good Shepherd Psalm, was written by David, and the Good Shepherd Psalm in the 80th chapter was written by Asaph. And if you know the profile of David and Asaph, you know that they were very different. In fact, a more affirmative psalm concerning God as Good Shepherd is Psalm 23. A more dubitative psalm is the Psalm 80. Another difference, for instance, is that the Psalm 23 refers God as my shepherd, Rohi, while the Psalm 80 refers God as a general shepherd. Another big difference between Psalm 23 and Psalm 80 is that Psalm 23 is a very personal psalm, addressing God as my shepherd, while Psalm 80 is a more group-related psalm, and presuppose not the personal faith, but a faith that has become more complicated because it refers to a very divided community, the community of Israel, with 12 sons. And how can God achieve to a big number of people as a shepherd what he achieves more easily on a personal level? So you have many differences, but we will stop that. I will stop comparing these two psalms of the Good Shepherd and concentrate myself on this Psalm 23. You and me, and as all the big readers of the book of Psalms, consider that this psalm is built up on a main metaphor. And the main metaphor is the metaphor of the shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. It's so affirmative, this expression, that immediately it gives us consolation, certainty, and peace. It's a tremendous strength in this psalm, in the first expression, the first verse, that cannot be put in doubt. The Lord is my shepherd. You cannot argue against that. But if we look more carefully, this psalm, nobody will say that is a too much idealistic psalm, because there are some tensions. Look, for instance, in the verse 2, where it says that this shepherd leads us outside in green pastures, but at the same time, verse 3, lead us also inside in our soul. And there is certainly a tension. You know how much difficult it is sometimes to put outside what is well done inside, or vice versa. Outside is going well, but inside we are troubled. So this is not an idealistic, romantic psalm, even if it is affirmative in its description of God and his lead, because it considers the complexity, the paradoxes of life. If you keep going, you will find also that is an affirmation in the second part of verse 3 when it said, he guides me in path of righteousness, so it is uncertainty. But at the same time, the verse 4 introduced the opposite of that, because it says, also through the valley of the shadow of the dead. So is certain or not certain? And the same thing you find also in verse 4, when is the certainty of I will not fear evil, because the evil is a danger, even if God is with me, but at the same time, I'm comforted by the God's lead. So it's a very realistic psalm. In essence, it says, God is my shepherd, but don't be deceptive. The valley of the shadow and death is also there in our path, you know. But I need to ask you a question now. If you have your Bible, in every chapter of the Bible, in every section, there is always a kind of rupture, discontinuity, in order to create a provocation, a kind of a call to think, to pray, to go deeper. You know. And my question for you is, what do you perceive as asymmetrical in this psalm? Somebody would say the valley or the shadow of death is asymmetrical to the certainty of the green pastures and the waters. This is asymmetrical. But there is a more deep asymmetry here in this psalm that breaks the psalm in two. Just think in yourself a little bit what that could be. It's really a psalm of the Good Shepherd, or is the psalm of something more? There is a change, a rupture, a kind of change of scenery. Actually, it's not very explicit in the text, but actually the bigger asymmetry in this psalm is not given by the sentence shadow, valley of death, in respect to the certain lead of the Lord, but is introduced in the first 5 through the second metaphor of this psalm, that it is metaphor of the table. That is curious. Why is curious? Because it's not only one scenery in this psalm, but actually there are 2. Until verse 4, we have an external situation, green pastures, valley, water. Starting from verse 5, we have an internal situation at home through this metaphor of the table. That is what pushes me to say that this psalm is not a monolithic psalm. Actually, this psalm is improperly called the psalm of the Good Shepherd, because this psalm is also could be called the psalm of the housewife who prepares a table. Why we have missed that? Why it has become only the psalm of the Good Shepherd? And that is what it called to make a differential diagnosis for the church, but also for God. Because here we need to make, and we are pushed by the text itself, to make a differential diagnosis also for God himself. Because God is not always a shepherd. God presents himself often also as a caring housewife. So what is the difference? My mother would say, if he would be alive, but at the end, it's the same God. It's an other metaphor. But actually, it's very different. Why? Because the attitudes and external atmosphere demands from us, the existential and psychological attitudes are different than those an internal atmosphere within the house demands from us. Or you behave inside the house as you behave outside the house. I hope no. Because outside the house, we are more alert, we are more careful, because there are more dangers. When we enter home, we are more trusting. We don't control and check behind every door what is there. We just are relaxed. So you perceive actually that these two metaphors introduce a differentiation in our way of living, also the spiritual life, and also our relation with God. And we cannot confuse some attitudes with the others, because we cannot behave in our spiritual life if we are outside or inside. So what I'm trying to suggest to you is that to say that we are Adventist, Bible-based, against the Catholic, is something we need to be aware of, but at the same time, we're being humble in admitting that we, as the Catholics, don't understand much the Bible. And it's not a consolation to say we understand a bit more. If you can read a bit more than your friend, you can't, boast yourself about this little superiority. But in the general picture, neither the Catholics, but also neither we Protestants, and neither we Adventists understand the center of the Bible. I'm challenging you. You even may know by heart, while the Catholic doesn't know that this psalm by heart. But what is the gain? What is the superiority? If you had not perceived in the psalm that there is a rupture, that God is shepherd, but also God is a housewife. I'm not saying that the spontaneous reading of the Bible, which perceives God's consolation in the psalm, is false. Every reading of the Bible, in my opinion, is legitimate. But attention, not every reading of the Bible gets the center of the Bible. Am I challenging you that you have, as myself, received a lot of this psalm, but we have not necessarily got the center of the psalm, because the center of the psalm is not the shepherd, it's the tension between the metaphor of the shepherd and the metaphor of God, a housewife. In a book I have written a couple of years ago with the title Beyond the Bible, Beyond the West, the Eras of Interpretation, that Dave Larson has made a generous presentation of this book 2 years ago in the Spectrum. I try to say this, that the Bible, if we want to have in the Bible a source of renewal, we need to dismiss continually the temptation of making of the Bible an Adventist Bible. It's not appropriate for the Bible itself, and it is deceptive for us. And I would like, just going to the conclusion, after this description of a broken psalm in two metaphors, try to show you how these two metaphors give to the psalms anthropological, ecclesiological, and theological big implications that general we don't perceive because we read the psalm only as the psalm of the Good Shepherd. The first is, in our understanding of God himself. What does it mean for God to behave as a housewife who prepares a table? There is a big difference. A big difference. Understanding and loving God as a housewife. Just, I will give you an example. Now, we fathers, or male, have a particular view of life. Very rational, all must be planned, all must be visible, While, after, for instance, the second feminist movement, not that of Simone de Beauvoir, who wanted the equality, but that of, for instance, Lucy Irigaray, a French feminist, or an Italian one, Adriana Cavarero, very known thinkers, they say, actually there is in women, even if we are like men at the level of rights, we have our own some particular categories. And one of these categories, typical of women, is that of care, to take care. And what is the difference between a very ordered and disciplined leadership as that of the shepherd? Is that it is very heroic, is concentrated in the leadership clear and the leadership efficient of that shepherd. The difference is that the housewife is more concentrated not with the leadership, but with the people. And you can perceive if you try to think these two metaphors through. In fact, God as a shepherd pretends from the sheep only obedience. The sheep cannot suggest him an alternative way, cannot suggest him another timing. All that is decided by the shepherd. We have in the God as a shepherd an heroic figure of God himself. He decides, he knows, he takes the lead, he's the hero. The sheep are only there to follow, to obey. That changed with the second metaphor. Because in the second metaphor, the housewife goes behind the scenes in the second plan. And we can perceive that taking in account one experience one dimension of this housewife is this the cooking. Do you imagine that a housewife who has prepared a table and a food says, this is the more delicious, food I have prepared for you? You can confirm that. Actually, someone who's cooking cannot pretend that. Because if the food is well done, well prepared, doesn't belong to the cook, but to the people who eat. And what does this imply for God himself? Look at this. In this second metaphor, it implies that the judgment about himself, in this second metaphor, is not given by God himself, but God asks the people who eat to say, how does my food taste? So there is a revolution just about the conception we have of God if we consider one metaphor of the other. In the metaphor of the shepherd, it's God who decides which way, what is true, what is to be done. In the second metaphor, the opinion is given to the people, even on God himself and on his action. Who does this? Our political leaders, our institutional leaders. It is very rare to find this. But it is presupposed in this psalm. This is the reason I find this second metaphor very powerful, because it changed not only our conception of God, but also our way of relating to him. The protagonist in the second metaphor is not God, but people. In the first metaphor, the protagonist is God, not the sheep. But this theological change, in my opinion, a big theological change concerning our understanding of God, has also a big anthropological change. How? And I ask you, what has changed in the sheep? What have become the sheep in the second metaphor, in the second part of the psalm? Actually, if you pay attention, there are no more sheep. There is a big metamorphosis, because the sheep have become persons in the second metaphor. That's very interesting for an anthropological and ethical understanding of Adventism. It means that while obedience of the sheep is a necessary condition to become Jesus' follower, is not a sufficient quality to become Jesus' disciples. So when people say you must obey, okay, but if you only obey, it's not okay at all. Because the final goal is not to remain a sheep. The final goal is to become persons. And you know what is the difference between a sheep who obeys and a person who is a person? Because obedience in a person's experience is only a part of the experience. A person is characterized by creativity, by imagination, even I would say by transgression. You cannot be a person if you are not anthropologically transgressive. Otherwise, you would be the repetition of your father. Is what Freud used to say, the parasite, the symbolic parasite, what is a way of becoming mature. If we wouldn't commit this symbolic parasite, Freud used to say, we wouldn't become ourselves. Because even if though we are rooted in our father and mother's identity, our destination is to add something new. If we don't add this something new, we are just a repetition of our parents. So to be a person, the same thing. If a person repeats of what his church says, just to be a bit more provocative in this, the church, even a nice church, would like to have predictable individuals, predictable individuals. A church doesn't like, to be bothered by the innovation the members introduce in the communal life. That bothers a lot. They like us, we won't become predictable. But if we are only predictable, we could say, like Freud, we are not persons. So we are persons when we are able to go beyond what our church says. Tell that to your pastor, to your conference president. We are through Adventists when we go beyond what the institution tells us. They will not be probably very happy about that because they like you to be predictable. In a nicer word to say this predictability, it sounds well, but actually doesn't correspond to what we're trying to say, is the word reliable. You need to be reliable, ethically reliable. And that's okay, as much as we add to this, basing ourselves in this second metaphor, that a person certainly must be reliable, but must be also, if it is a person, of surprising. How much our Adventism allows and promote that in us? How much instead wants us to be just obedient? So I understand also that this is a fact of balance between obedience and creativity. But basing myself on this psalm, I would formulate this way. Try to be careful with the families, with the communities, with the institutions which want you to be just obedient. Because even if that model of obedience is presented in biblical terms, actually it contradicts the Bible itself. Just if we read properly this second metaphor of the Psalm 23. So, when people, and I go to the conclusion in order to have time to exchange some ideas, when people today tell me, I'm reading the Bible. When I was a young pastor, among so many people who didn't read the Bible, and somebody told me, I'm reading the Bible, I'm starting to read the Bible, I was very happy. Somebody's starting to read the Bible. Today is no more the case. When somebody tells me I have started reading the Bible, actually I get worried. Because if you don't see the asymmetries every text contains, like this Psalm 23, it's more probably that this unilateral reading of the Bible will confirm your obsessions, your compulsions, and will not create a new life. Nor for you, neither for your church. The question is, how are you reading the Bible? This is the differential diagnosis. Different way of reading the Bible, different way of conceiving God, different way of conceiving yourself, different way of conceiving the community. So I end with a question for you. After your guess, our communities in America, in Europe, in Peru, South America, are led by the heroic shepherd or by the housewife? What is your guess? Because if we choose one or the other, or one and the other together, all change, not only for the anthropology, the ethics, but also for the church itself. Because it's not the same if we have in the leadership the heroic shepherd. That is good, but it's not enough. And even it can become misleading. Okay, so that is what I wanted to share with you. And that is what I call slow Adventism. Because slow Adventism is starting with the Bible itself, to read less but better. In fact, I'm very allergic to this Bible study plan to read all the Bible in 1 year. This is a quantitative. You can even read the Bible less, and even once a week. My father will be upset with that, but I would answer if my father were here. I would tell him, even if you read qualitatively well once a week, it could be eventually be more than enough to have a different understanding of God, of His church, and your personal destiny. Okay, I give you the word, Lauren,
Yeah,
to
thank you.
organize.
This has been excellent. I appreciate very much what you said. Before we go on, let me just remind you that next week our teacher is going to be a young non-denominational pastor, not an Adventist teacher. His name is Colby Martin. About 6 or 7 years ago, he wrote a book called Unclobber, which is taking on what are traditionally called the clobber texts against LGBTQ people, and shows how they really are not very much what you're talking about today. They don't mean what the people use them to mean when they use them as proof texts. So that's going to be a big, interesting topic for us. Um, Dr. Gutierrez, I'm still back at where you said our problem is sometimes an excess of Adventism. And as somebody who spent 40 plus years being a pastor, I just have been chewing that over and over and over in my mind, because I remember the many times that people would come to me and say, I'm not happy. I'm not feeling fulfilled. And their answer was, Pastor, can you give us more Adventism? Can you give us more prophecies? Can you give us can you give us more people to witness to? Um, can you teach us how to dig down deeper into Adventist truths? And it's very true. It wasn't biblical truths. It was Adventist truths. I remember a couple sitting in my office and saying, Pastor, uh, you're not satisfying us. You're not giving us the meat. And I said, I preach from the Gospels every week. Every week I say that Jesus died for you and that you can have the assurance of salvation. I say it over and over again. They said, that's not what we mean by the meat. We want the Adventist meat. We want you haven't never preached a sermon to us about the Roman Catholics. I said, yeah, Guilty as charged. I have never preached a sermon to you about persecution. I've never preached a sermon about the close of probation. And they said, you are failing us in that. We want the meat. More Adventism, more Adventism. And as you were speaking, it struck me that I think the reason people kept asking for more Adventism is because the Adventism they had wasn't working for them. And they were convinced that more of it probably would. They didn't have the imagination. And I confess, as a pastor, I didn't always have the imagination to know what to do, to give them what probably would have really satisfied them, because I too was an agent of the conference and of the corporate church. And things like membership and tithe and all were important to me too, because that's who I worked for. I don't know. You can comment on that or not, but that's kind of my experience and what I thought of as you were talking.
Yeah, I can say something. I have been describing this as a anomaly in our common spirituality that is easy to describe in others sometimes if you pay attention, but actually is very diffuse even in those who criticize. So it's not a question of detaching ourselves from others because we are saying you are in this problem and we are not. Actually, what I have described is also my problem in various degrees, in various forms, because it is inside every nice spiritual experience. And this is the reason we need, as the Bible teaches us, to assess continually in a relaxed way, I would say, because we don't need to be obsessed by that, but we need a continuous assessment of the direction our spiritual life is taking. Sometimes it's necessary to make this assessment explicitly, but most of the time, I would say, it's better to make it implicitly. Otherwise, we become too much obsessed with perfection. We need to correct it and so on. And the implicit way of being assessed in our spiritual journey, I find it is to be in relation with people. Because when you are in relation with people, even if you don't say explicitly, just by the fact of being with people, you get to know if you are doing well or you are doing not well, And this enormous positive, ingredient of being with people, I consider to be of two kinds. To be in relation in order to know the quality of our way, spiritual way. We notice that being with people outside the church, that is the reason I'm very critical of people who are very anti-ecumenical. Because it's the perfect way of being anti-ecumenical, of remain close in ourselves. And we lose one important ingredient to know if we are doing well or not, to be in touch with outside people. But the second way of remaining in touch with the concept of reality is to be aware of the alternatives and the differences within our own church. This is the reason I defend, promote a healthy pluralism, not only outside the church, but also inside the church. No. But you are right. It is a problem we all have. Some people in a major degree and form, but everybody are touched by this entering in a system and be close in that system, and from being a blessing, that system which has saved us or has helped us becomes part of the problem. So it's a very common experience, after all, in all the Christian history.
I think a lot of Adventists are terrified of pluralism. I think of all the Sabbath school classes I've sat through where, you're walking down the road and they turn over every rock to see the same thing that they saw last week. And they finish up and I think, what a relief. We found that everything that we always said before was true and nobody contradicted us. Isn't it wonderful? We've studied the Bible. Hey, let me move on here to Linda. Linda, it's your turn.
Hi. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Dr. Hanz. I'll make this short and sweet. I became an Adventist from being a Catholic, because I went to church on Sunday and then I found out, oh, nope, it's supposed to be Saturday. I wasn't a Christian in either environment, but and I started going on Saturday. The Adventists were the only ones keeping the Sabbath. So on the first, I didn't know any church kept Saturday. So I said, well, I'll just go shopping and whatever. But I found out there was this church called Seventh Adventist, so I joined it. I'm going to tell you, after I became an Adventist, I started drinking more heavily. I started using drugs. I started smoking. I wasn't doing smoking before I became an Adventist. Even the pastor even came up one day. I was in the parking lot smoking a cigarette. I put it out. But he didn't say nothing. I was at the checkout counter at a store one time buying my beer. I was going to church, baptized member. And I didn't know he was over there, but he came around. He had purchased whatever he was going to purchase. I couldn't see him, or else I would have taken off. But he looked at me, the speaker, and then he looked down at the thing, saw my beer. Neither one of these pastors said anything to me. Probably wouldn't have helped anyway. It was only when I came to my support group that I learned that I was powerless over these things and that I needed a higher power. I learned about the Holy Spirit. I learned about that I couldn't just try harder as an Adventist to be and I can tell you my life started changing. It's been so long since I don't desire to drink, and it's been decades. It's been probably about 30 years since I even wanted to smoke. It just was taken away. And it wasn't taken away because I tried hard enough. Because they told me, just come to church on the Sabbath, don't eat pork and shrimp and all that other stuff. And I didn't. I didn't. But it wasn't fulfilling. When I got out of church on Saturday night after sunset, it was on. It was on. It was a bottle of champagne, a bottle of vodka, anything that could take me and make me feel like a human being. My son, for 10 years, for the past 10 years, before then, he was on drugs and everything. Cuss his daddy out, but he wouldn't cuss me out because he knew I had a gun. And I think he knew I probably would have shot him. I don't think I would have, but I think he probably thought I was. Today, 10 years later, my son is a committed Christian. He not in any church. I mean, he go to church with his wife. He got married three years ago. His wife is not a Seventh Adventist, but he just go with her, he said, and he has fun. But before he got married, he stopped using drugs, stopped sleeping around with women, stopped drinking alcohol because he found the love of God and he knew he needed a power. Because he would tell me, I would talk on the phone with him, we would have some conversation, we go round and round. And when I stopped trying to change him and I let him find the God of his understanding and that power, because I'm gonna tell you, nothing could change me. And I know I had influence on him by drinking. He knew I was drinking. Because my children saved my life one time. I was about to choke on my own, and they saved my life. Uh, Adventism didn't change me, but I still want to change. But I know that Christ is my righteousness, and I hate death, but I'm not afraid that I'm gonna go to hell, even Adventist hell or anything else, you know. So yeah, you know,
Let's
I get
get
what you're saying about slow Adventism. I get what you're saying. Thank you.
thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
We'll go on to Bjorn.
Well, I feel really inadequate after Linda's stories there. I don't have anything to match it, but I definitely identify with the concern for children, and that kind of that was one of my trains of thought, Dr. Gutierrez, when I was listening to your talk, which I loved, by the way. And I'm also in a European context. I'm Swedish, so I felt a little offended when you were criticizing us Northern Europeans and our German tendencies when it comes to believing in industry and all that stuff, trying harder. But I am convinced that a slower sort of Mediterranean Adventism could be a solution. Even though you were not you resisted saying it was the solution. But here's my question: if we're going to be really practical, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I feel myself doing what you confess to doing, which is, as much as I disagree with parts of the Adventism that was kind of passed to me from my parents, a lot of it I respect, but a lot of it I also kind of push back on. I find myself kind of passing on a lot of the same stuff in an updated way to my 10-year-old daughter. She's recently started reading the Bible for herself in the mornings. We've got her involved in church, but yeah, I'm afraid of passing on all the worst baggage to her without even meaning to. So what's your advice to me at this stage? Because I'd very much like to take a quantity, sorry, a Freudian slip, a quality, not quantity sort of approach to Adventism, and be able to help my daughter and her friends have a healthy spirituality going forward. For a kind of an Adventism 2.0 approach. So, yeah, what are your practical tips?
Yeah, thanks, Bjorn, for your testimony, also your family, your daughter. I have a kind of precise advice, because there is no, I think, a practical solution that works for everybody, for every situation. That is the bad side of the answer. There is not a recipe you can apply and that will work. But the good thing of this is that creates initially an uncertainty. But this uncertainty is not bad in itself, because it pushes us to adapt our ideas to that particular situation. Because the problem would be if picking up for other people's experience that had work, you apply that to your daughter, It's other experience. If your daughter is unique, as every person is unique, it means that you need to consider her particular situation. And what that means for you, it means that as much as you need to know the therapy, so the Bible God, you need to know and you need to study your daughter. And that is difficult for us, because we think, as an average Adventist, that we need to know very much the Bible, the solution, but not the people, because every people is the same. That is completely wrong. Because as a physician is a good physician when he knows or she knows all the medical strategies very well, he is reliable in that. But if at the same time that physician is able to get in touch and to know that person who is in front of him, that would be so it means that we need to be rooted in general strategies, because we can learn from them. But actually, we need to pay attention to the uniqueness of the person, in this case, your daughter, that is very hard to know, because you are her father, and maybe you pretend to know her, but actually you don't know. If you're a good father, you don't know your daughter. You know the quantitative elements. She is 14 years old. She is 1 meter and 60. No, she goes to the. But that is not the essential. The essential is, are you in touch with her soul, with her, with her bad experience, with her perception of life, with her identity, psychological identity, and that is very difficult. So that would be part of the answer. The other element of answer I would like to give a comment to your intervention is what Rick Rice is a retired theologian from Loma Linda University, who wrote a very interesting book 25 years ago with the title BBB, Believing, Behaving, Belonging. And what he says, Rick Rice, actually says a very interesting thing. That we have, as an Adventist church, take a lot of advantage of taking in account very seriously believing and behaving. So to know correctly the Bible and also to behave properly in a coherent way. And that has given Adventism really a very big dynamism all over the world, over the countries Adventism has reached. But actually, he says, that's not more the case, because these virtues of believing well and behaving well is not enough to guarantee and secure a healthy spirituality, because we are lacking something that is not very, very present in our mind, and it is belonging. We are not really good enough in creating belonging and relationships, not only inside the church, but also outside the church. And I agree completely with Rick in his statement. And creating belonging today has become very difficult, not only in the church, but also in families. If you ask me, how about your believing and behaving in your family, I would say more or less, but in belonging, we're having a lot of difficulties because we don't succeed in creating, a kind of deep relationship of belonging with our children, and that, I think, it's a part of the big challenge we have today. I'm sure I have not answered, what you were asking, but at least I have tried to comment a little bit. So the unicity of the people, in this case your daughter, in the necessity, without giving up believing and behaving, but underline and discover the enormous power of relationships in a very much individualistic society, as California, for instance, or even Italy or North Europe. That is very difficult because we tend to make contracts. No, even if we go to the, our contracts. You come, we eat together. If you don't, but that is not deep relationship, and that is very difficult because we have become very much individualistic. Thank you.
Thank you. That was there was a lot there. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bjorn. Yeah, in fact, seems to me sometimes the believing and behaving aspects are actually the place where stress is introduced into relationships among Adventists. Dr. Pamphile, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. Thank you for such a deep presentation. I have been thinking as you spoke and asked myself, could it be that our problem, or part of our problem, is our doctrinal orientation? For example, we teach and we learn in doing exegesis that in our final conclusion, we must bring everything that we think we've discovered to align with what we perceive to be the general position of the Bible, regardless of the point that we are studying. When all is said and done, it must all align with the general position of the Bible, which in fact is simply our general position on the Bible. And so it happens that, as you mentioned, we may study a portion of the Bible and come up with the very same answers that we have always had from 1863. For example, we study every 4 or 5 years. We study the book of the Epistle to the Hebrews, and still come up with a judgment begun in 1844, and so on and so on. So that we keep going around with the very same thing, because we are to align what we understand from a particular text on what is, or what we perceive to be, the general teaching of the Bible. To use the analogy of the dog and its tail, it's the doctrines wagging the dog, the doctrines wagging the church, instead of the other way around. How can we get out of that?
Yeah, thank you, Clarence.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to approach the problem of doctrinal precision, but nevertheless, I would like to say a couple of things. 3 things, actually. First, we certainly need to search for a right doctrine, because it's difficult to live well if we are based in wrong doctrines. So I'm in favor of continually keep searching in order to pick up the right doctrine in the Bible in our church. But the second thing I would like to add to this, so I'm not giving up the search for doctrines, right doctrines. But the second thing I need to say is that we need to resist the obsession of pretending to know all the doctrines in order to be blessed by God. That I consider to be a terrible obsession, because even if we make all the efforts to get the right doctrines, we will never really have a full understanding of those doctrines. So that creates attention. But I mention this because the conclusion we draw from this pretension to have all the doctrines right is to pretend that we cannot be blessed if we only have a partial understanding of this doctrine. And that I consider to be wrong, because otherwise God will never really bless us, because we will never have a complete understanding of the doctrines. So correct to search for the doctrines, but don't pretend to be blessed only when we have a complete understanding of those doctrines. But the third point, that is more complicated to explain, but makes part of this big perspective, is don't pretend to have all the doctrines right in order to be blessed. Because even if we Adventists pretend to have our doctrines right, I would say that we have also some mistakes in our doctrines. And I don't have the time to try to show that. Why that is important? Because extending the same understanding I was commenting before, we think that we cannot be blessed if we have some mistaken elements in our doctrinal system. And that I consider to be completely wrong. In other words, God bless us in despite of the fact that we have an incomplete understanding of his doctrines. And even more than that, he blesses us even if we have some mistaken forms of his doctrines, but he blesses us the same. And to understand that, in my opinion, is very important. First, for ourselves, but also to be more tolerant with other people. Because we say, how can God bless the Jehovah's Witness if they have a wrong understanding of Christ? But if we then discover that God bless us as Adventists, even with these mistaken forms of some of our doctrines, that would be more easy for us to understand that he can bless also the Jehovah's Witness, even if we consider they have some mistaken forms. In other words, the blessing of God goes beyond of the correctness or the propositional form of our doctrine declaration. It doesn't mean that we need to stop that. No, we need to keep searching, but being aware that we'll never have a complete understanding of his doctrines, and that we will always have flawed ways or mistaken form, partial elements, and understanding his doctrines. No? So, in other words, the Adventist doctrinal system is not perfect, it's perfectible. And I'm not giving up. I have been teaching dogmatics, so the doctrinal system of the church for 30 years. So it's very precious to me. But I have come to this conclusion. And I finish with an addition to this. Actually, this inerrancy principle applied to the Bible that we consider as official church that is wrong, because the Bible has some errors, historical or grammatical, but in the perspective is good. So we have overcome biblical inerrancy because we cannot defend that, even though we have been for many decades entrapped in this inerrancy understanding of the Bible. We have overcome that, but actually we have just transferred that inerrancy from the Bible to the doctrines. And I think that we are committing the same mistake, no more to a level of the reading of the Bible, but at the level, a more sophisticated level of the articulation of our doctrines. Because we think that if it is a true system, this doctrinal system has not to have mistakes. And that is the inerrancy principle just transferred to the doctrinal level. And I keep saying that to have also in our doctrinal system some inadequacies, inaccuracies, even some little mistake, doesn't make our system false. So this is a bigger topic, but I wanted to commend your intervention with those two things.
Thank you very much. Very good eye opener, certainly.
Yeah, thank you, Clarence. I'm keeping an eye on the time here, so both questioners and answerer probably have to be a bit succinct here. Dr. Tichy, your turn.
Dr. Gutierrez, thank you for this presentation. I have been reading your your columns, your articles through the years in Spectrum, and I really appreciate your line of thinking. When you address the Adventism in excess in your presentation, what came to my mind was the word control. I have been exposed to Adventism since age 4, got 16 years of education in Brazil, in São Paulo, although I live in America now. But I lived in Brazil for 40 years. So as like you, I can understand how control works in the South American division, how the church needs to control people, and they are in minutiae, in details and all that. And this has been a major problem because how can we develop and have well-developed Christians when they are kind of kept, under control on every aspect of their lives? Sometimes I lived 33 years in Southern California, in close to Loma Linda, and though in that area, people cannot understand very well how the church controls the members worldwide because they are very independent. But that control has been really a tragedy to the church and to the members. Now, in order to change this, I want your perspective on that, if you will. Do you think that the church, the official church, has some string, a hidden string of flexibility, hidden somewhere there, that will allow the church to decrease that insane control that they exert on the members, and give the members more flexibility in order to think more, openly, and less in less conformity with the church, with the official church? Because the way it is, the church will be keep losing more and more members due to lack of flexibility, cognitive flexibility. What do you think?
Good question.
Yeah. Thank you, George. Finally, I get to know you because through the years, I wrote your name on comments of my article. So
I am.
hello.
So am I on your blacklist?
No. Yeah, I would just say you are right. Control, but control is an ambivalent category because without control, our life becomes a chaos. But with too much control, our life becomes too rigid, too predictable. So actually, I think that only a mature personality can take the positive aspect of control, but at the same time combine control with other additional and balancing virtues. And that is, the problem. I would never speak against control because I know what a life becomes without the sense of control and discipline. But at the same time, I have seen lives ruined by excessive control. So what is the difference at the end? If a life gets destroyed by an excessive control than a life that just loses itself by a deficit of control. The end, even if the mechanisms are different, are the same. I would say that the flexibility is an essential component of human identity, because we need on one side to maintain the availability. We need to being able of being acknowledged by people. Otherwise, we would become too unpredictable. But at the same time, we need to exercise some flexibility in order to face new situations new perspective, new people we get to know, And this psychological, I would end with this, tension that creates, the flexibility together with the certainty of our own identity is written in our own body. Because a healthy heart is made of contraction and distension. This is systole and diastole. An only contracting heart, even if doesn't seems to be like that, actually is a sick heart, because the heart is contraction and distension, And the same with control. We need to control and to let it be. So actually we are picking up for our spiritual profile what is written down in our own body.
Thank you very much. George, thank you for your question. I'm going to move on to Linda now.
Thank you, Lauren. Dr. Gutierrez, thank you so much for your presentation. I always have to work hard to really grasp the concepts that you share and appreciate them very much. Although I have to say I was a bit alarmed toward the end of your talk when I wrote it down, that we should keep searching for the right doctrine. The thing that immediately popped into my mind was the old 20th century play, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. And for those that might not be familiar with it, it was really a seminal piece of work about two tramps who are waiting endlessly for a mysterious figure, Godot, who never shows up. And they pass the time in, I'm looking at my AI here, at philosophical and nonsensical conversations that explore the meaninglessness of existence and the human condition. That's about how searching for the right doctrine strikes me. I fear that it is an effort in futility. But having said that, things that you said earlier really piqued my interest. And I have heard others tangentially address the same thing, and that is some of the real difficulties associated with just reading the Bible. And it has caused me to wonder if perhaps the concern about giving up the necessity of reading the Bible in some systemic way, some rote kind of way, is because absent that, we are simply left to our one-on-one relationship with God for our spiritual growth, and that just scares the hell out of most of us, to be in that one-on-one situation without something else that we can just look at. And I'm curious, this is my question, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being most important and 1 being not really important at all, where would you rate the Bible and reading the Bible?
Okay, Linda, you are raising some difficult questions.
That's probably why Lauren took my hand down on purpose.
Yeah, no, but you are right. And I will not try to apologize myself, but I wanted just to underline the necessity of searching for a meaningful perspective. That is what.
That's different. That's different than a doctrine.
You are
is
right.
It not? Okay.
You are right. That is bigger than right doctrine. But since the question was about doctrines, so I reduce the bigger perspective that I call meaningful perspective, because if we don't have a meaningful perspective, at least we don't aspire to be in a meaningful perspective, it's more difficult to get along with our normal common experiences. But the right doctrines is the ambivalent way of Adventism to refer to this meaningful perspective. It's very reductive because the meaningful perspective is bigger than a right doctrine, but it's part of our language. If in our church, I would say we are not interested at all in right doctrines, people will chase me away immediately, But what I intend is the right doctrines is the broad and the short way of referring to a necessary, meaningful perspective that we all should aspire to have in our sight. Let us put this way. You tell me 1 to 10, the Bible, you know, I have written a chapter in a previous book about the Bible, advocating for a third testament, Old Testament, New Testament, and I think that is too short. That is something that we should have a third testament. Sure, that will not be canonical, but to stop into the revelation is just reducing the life and reality to a book, and that is too limiting. Mm-hmm. So I would say, trying to come with you and your perspective, for me, the Bible in this scale 1 to 10 is worth maybe 3, 4. A low rate, with some people say, because I understand that God speaks not only in the Bible, but today especially speaks very often outside the Bible. And that makes the other 6, 7 points. For this reason, I consider that for understanding correctly the Bible today, we need to read not only the Bible, but to read people's history, people real life, or what the world is, you know. But saying this, I would also add, in order to understand that part of the world through which God also speaks to us is very interesting and helpful to be accompanied by the Bible. So I'm not giving up the Bible. It's important. But we have, in my opinion, too much reduced the reality to the Bible. And sometimes I use the example of the map. You know, for me, the Bible is the best map God had given to humanity, but still is a map. You cannot compare a map with another map. You need to compare the map with the territory. And the Bible is not the territory, in my opinion. In my opinion, the Bible is the best map that we need still to confront with the territory that is given by the human life, with the reality. So I'm very critical of the principle of a unilateral understanding of the principle of the sola scriptura. I think that is valid, but it's very, very, very ambiguous, very, very ambiguous, because you cannot validate, and I'm very critical of the Biblical Research Institute, for instance, because they keep saying that the only way of validating the Bible is the Bible itself. I'm against that, because the way of validating the Bible, sure, is with the Bible also, but the Bible can be validated only by an external element of the Bible, that is the real life. So the Bible is not the territory. It's a very good map, an inspired map, but the territory is something else. And if we don't know that territory, we have a bad understanding of the map.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, because in reality, then, it's up to me to plot my own course through the map.
Yeah, we can put that way. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Yeah, I used to teach an occasional class on preaching, Dr. Gutierrez, and I would tell people that preaching involves 2 exegetical problems. One is of the Bible, the other is of the lives of your people, the stories that you hear.
We've been hacked.
Yep.
We've been hacked.
Okay, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, just a comment on a word of thanks for the presentation today, and the fact that AT has been so great in presenting varying views of spirituality and theology from around the world. Because, as I mentioned, I was brought up that only the American view, the GC view of this country, was the correct one, and that others had errors or just were not up to par. So again, thank you for what we've had. Oops, they've been hacked and
Okay. Yeah, we're keeping an eye on who can do things here. Weird stuff going on. Yeah,
a very knowledgeable hacker.
I don't know who's doing this, but
Best to close it.
this is who is this person? Oh, Richard's whiteboard. Okay, Richard, you're gone. There you go. Sorry about that. Okay, Ray, are you done? I can't hear you.
So there's an account called Johnson of Gorilla. He needs to be, or Gloria. He needs to
Yeah, they're
still going here.
creating new accounts all the time.
Okay.
So trying to keep up with them. All right. You're Ray, are you thank you very much for your comment. I'm going to go on to, let's see, Mark Carr now. Mark, let me make sure that you're unmuted. There you go. And there is our friend Colette as well. Hi, Colette.
Hi, Lauren. Ciao, Hanz. Nice to
Ciao.
see you.
Nice to see you and to listen to you also
Yeah,
from a,
bonjour.
from
Yeah,
a place you know very well.
yes. Before I forget, un big abbraccio a Francesca.
Grazie mille.
Grazie. Hanz, it's not a question, it's a thank you. Me for since I was born, and I was born in the church, like we say. I read the Psalm 23 in a one way only. And today you challenged me in the sense that I had never questioned that particular verse about the table. And I had always accepted the explanation and the comments of the people around me. And this verse had always bothered me in the psalm. I never really understood it. It didn't fit. And now that you say it's a split, I forgot the word you are using, but I get it. It doesn't fit with it didn't fit with the rest of the psalm. And the explanation that people were given me and that I had been given all those years was that this table was it's sort of, I had imagined in my head a big stone altar, something that you place in front of your enemy so they can't get to you. And I had never seen that table as a table. As a table where you have a guest around, where you invite people to come and sit and eat and enjoy a meal. And I thank you because it's the first time that I'm seeing this verse as what it really is, meaning a table with guests around and not a defensive wall or whatever it was I had in my head. And it made so much more sense now. And I love to be able to imagine now God as a housewife who has so much pleasure dressing up a table for us. And it touches me because in this Alaskan winter, where we are right now, dressing up a table with lights and colors and good food is
He's
so
an
much part of my
ethicist for the
life.
health
It's
system in Alaska.
it's so much
Yeah. You
something
see
I
it?
enjoy doing for my family. I have so much pleasure into making good and flavorful food and offer it to my family and make the table pretty. And I have so much joy in that. So imagining God doing that for us and having so much pleasure in our delighting of His food and His gifts is a gift for me to be able to see this verse and now
You get fun
in
out
that
of it
view.
somehow.
And yes, the last thing I want to say is yes. So that verse that was at first, when I didn't like at all
Mike.
in the psalm, I didn't get it. It was not. I didn't like it. It's becoming now my favorite, and I thank you for that, for this new view on the table.
Yes. Thank you, Colette. I will just comment a little bit. Yeah, the table is not an obstacle, but it's a big metaphor of inclusiveness.
Yeah.
So much of inclusiveness that even the enemies are present in the table. So there's a very inclusive experience. But this inclusiveness, and we need to imagine things that are not written in the text, but are presupposed in the text. This inclusiveness cannot be kept and maintained if we keep the same criteria of believing or behaving. In other words, inclusiveness can be guaranteed only if we change the criteria for looking and understanding people in the world. In fact, you perceive that here the criterion of to be part of the community at the table has detached from the orthodoxy and goes and pass through aesthetical categories. I'm mentioning this because I know you as a very attentive and refined person with beauty. And I keep this idea of Colette as a person very perceptive, very attentive of the main role beauty plays in life of people. And this table is precisely that, because people are together not because they agree on their ideas or their behaviors, just because they are happy and they are united in the tasting of the food God has prepared for them. So I agree completely, and we could even go deeper in the exploration of these new categories this second part of the psalm introduced.
Grazie, grazie. Un abbraccio.
Anche a voi.
I'm keeping an eye on the time here, and Ed Reifsetter, you have the last word.
Oh. Well, I'd like to go back as the last word then to the title of the presentation today, Slow Adventism, which is probably in the impressions most of us have of our church, a contradiction in terms. It's kind of contrary to our Adventist culture. Here's what we hear: study, pray, witness, each one win one, total member involvement, give Bible studies, win the world. Don't meditate because a still mind is the devil's playground. Everything is do, go, go, go. So busy. We're so busy if we follow the line that it's hard to hear God speaking to us. So thank you very much for your presentation today, Hanz. And what needs to change in our corporate selves, so to speak, that has us less busy and more into some sort of communication with our God?
Yeah, thank you, Ed, for this remarks and observation. Yeah, I remember you sum up very well what my father also used to say to me: "A still mind is the playground of the devil." So you need to be busy. Yeah, and you mentioned also with God's help we could probably resolve that. More than with God, I will think that relations can save us, because relations introduce something that we are not really used to. That is the surprise, the uniqueness of other people make necessarily our way slower, no? And when we just keep running, we can be almost be certain and sure that people have really disappeared of our journey. It's only people that slow down our pace. And that can help us a lot to discover another dimension of our spiritual journey.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Gutierrez, thank you very much for being here with us. Just want to remind you, next week we have Reverend Colby from San Diego. He's going to be speaking about his book, Unclobber, which takes on the clobber text from Scripture. I may need to deputize a few of you to, we've been very lucky in this class. We haven't really had many people who have disrupted our class like we had today, and these were fairly manageable. I managed to get rid of most of them quite quickly. And I apologize to those of you who had to see things you didn't want to, but you've been on the internet, you know how vile it can be. Dr. Gutierrez, one more thing. Can you tell folks, show us the cover of your book and tell us where we can get it?
Yeah, this is the cover of my recent book. It's published in the United States by Whip and Stock. And I will send to you, because you can order this book with the normal platforms, Amazon and so on. But you have, it costs $28, but with a particular code I will send to you for all the people who are interested, you can get a discount of the 40%. So with a much cheaper price. Okay, and I will send to Lauren this code in order all those who are interested can use that code when you are buying the book.
Oh, do you want to just put the link to buy the book and the code right in the chat right now, so those who want to get it can?
Yeah, I don't have now, because I'm not in my computer by my phone.
Okay.
But in order to have the discount, you need to go to the website of Whip and Stock, and the book appears there. And then when you are paying, you need to put in the code CONF, CONF, 40, conf40. And with that code, you get the 40% discount. It is CONF40. And that discount is available only in the Whip and Stock website, not in Amazon.
Okay, I just posted that. Double check it, make sure that I got it right. Okay, folks, I posted it in the website. I think take a look. Thank you very much.